What if I told you that the greatest threat to your country isn't war, isn't corruption, isn't even evil? What if the real danger is something so ordinary, so invisible, that most people never even recognize it until it's too late? You see, it doesn't scream. It doesn't break down doors. It smiles. It nods. And it quietly erodes the very foundation of human dignity. This threat is stupidity. Not the kind that makes someone bad at math. Not ignorance. But something far more insidious, something Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German pastor and anti-Nazi dissident, called a moral disease of the soul. Right now, intelligent people, doctors, engineers, teachers, even leaders are spreading misinformation, endorsing dangerous ideologies, and making decisions that put lives at risk. And they truly believe they're doing good. You might wonder, how can someone with a PhD fall for a conspiracy theory? Or how can a loving parent turn against proven science and endanger their own child? The answer is terrifying, because when people stop thinking independently, they stop being truly human. They become, as Bonhoeffer wrote, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be the strongest at the moment. And here's the twist. This isn't just about them. It's about you and me and what happens to any of us when we get tired, scared, overwhelmed, and we start letting the world think for us. Right now, in this exact moment, you are surrounded by systems designed to exploit your instincts, cloud your judgment, and reward your emotional reactions over your careful thoughts. This is no longer just a social problem. It's a structural, psychological, and even spiritual crisis. And if you've ever felt like something in our world doesn't make sense anymore, like the smart are acting foolish and the good are doing harm, you're not imagining things. There's a name for this madness. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. So let me ask you this. Are you thinking for yourself? Or are you just reacting? If that question shakes something inside you, then this video is absolutely meant for you.
If you're still here, it means something inside you hasn't gone numb yet. It means you still care about truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And that already sets you apart. We're not here to preach. We're here to think together. So if this resonates with you, if you've ever looked around and wondered, why does it feel like everyone's lost their mind? Then you're in the right place. Take a moment now to hit that like button, not for me, but for the algorithm. Because in a digital world ruled by outrage and noise, thoughtful content needs a little help to survive. And if you want to keep exploring ideas that challenge, disturb, and awaken, go ahead and subscribe. We go deep, and we go often. You don't need to agree with everything. You just need the courage to ask questions, even when everyone else has stopped. Let's keep going, because what you're about to hear next might just change how you see the world.
We often think of stupidity as the absence of intelligence, as if it's a permanent condition, a lack, a void. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer saw it differently. And once you understand his perspective, you'll never see the word stupid the same way again. You see, stupidity, in the way Bonhoeffer described it, isn't about low IQ. It's not about education or how many books you've read or how many degrees hang on your wall. It's about what happens when a person, slowly or suddenly, stops thinking for themselves. It's not an inability, it's a surrender. He called it the abdication of thought, a quiet decision, sometimes unconscious, to let someone else, something else, do the thinking for you. Think of it like this. You know someone, we all do, who's brilliant on paper. They can quote facts, ace exams, maybe even run a company. But bring up a difficult moral issue, and suddenly they speak in slogans. Their eyes glaze over. They repeat what they've heard, not what they've considered. And here's the haunting part. They don't even know they've stopped thinking. Bonhoeffer wrote, "In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is not dealing with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that has taken possession of him." And you felt that, haven't you? That eerie moment when you realize you're not talking to a human anymore. You're talking to a script. It's like they've outsourced their mind. And often, they've done it to feel safe, to feel certain, in a world that feels too complex to face alone. But here's the deeper lesson. Stupidity in this sense is a choice we all flirt with. Every time we reach for the easiest answer, every time we dismiss a viewpoint without understanding it, every time we react instead of reflect, we inch closer to that quiet surrender. And it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in, disguised as comfort and reinforced by the crowd. So no, stupidity isn't the opposite of intelligence. It's the moment intelligence goes quiet. The moment we trade thought for ease. And in the next part, we'll look at just how dangerous that trade becomes, not only for individuals, but for entire societies. Let's keep going.
In 1961, something happened at Yale University that shocked the world and maybe even cracked open something dark about all of us. Psychologist Stanley Milgram had a question. It was simple, but chilling. How far would an ordinary person go just because an authority told them to? So he set up an experiment. Volunteers were invited into a lab. They were told they were helping with a study on memory and learning. They would be the teacher, and in the next room, hidden behind a wall, was the learner. Every time the learner gave a wrong answer, the teacher was instructed to deliver an electric shock, increasing the voltage each time. Now, here's what the volunteers didn't know. There were no real shocks. The person screaming behind the wall was just acting. But the screams felt real. The cries, the pounding on the wall, the silence that followed the highest voltages. Still, 65% of participants, regular people, continued to the very end. They pressed the button marked "Danger, Severe Shock," even as they believed they were harming someone. Why? Not because they were cruel, not because they wanted to hurt, but because a man in a white lab coat calmly told them the experiment must continue. That's all it took. And here's the truly terrifying part. Many of the participants showed signs of stress. They sweated, trembled, even begged to stop. But they still obeyed, because something inside them had gone quiet. Their moral compass temporarily suspended, their critical thinking overridden by the presence of authority. Now pause with that for a second. These weren't villains. They were secretaries, teachers, postal workers, people like you, people like me. And what Milgram uncovered wasn't just blind obedience. It was what Bonhoeffer had already warned us about 2 decades earlier. When people surrender their judgment to authority, when they stop thinking for themselves, they become instruments, not individuals. And it doesn't take a dictatorship. It can happen anywhere trust in the system is stronger than trust in one's own conscience. So the lesson? Stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's terms, isn't loud or angry. It's polite, compliant. It wears a lab coat, and it says, "You're just following orders." But in the next part, we'll turn to the man who saw this coming long before Milgram ever ran an experiment. A man who paid his life for resisting that silence. Let's meet him next.
Before he became a warning, before his words echoed through history, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was simply a young man, curious, brilliant, and deeply devoted to truth. He was born in 1906 into a family of scientists and thinkers. His father was a prominent psychiatrist. His brothers were philosophers, lawyers, academics. So from an early age, Bonhoeffer was surrounded by rationality, debate, and a deep faith in the power of education. He wasn't some ivory tower philosopher dreaming up theories from a distance. He was grounded, real, a Lutheran pastor, a theologian who believed deeply in God and the human capacity for reason. But everything changed in the 1930s when Germany, the land of poets and thinkers, slowly descended into something darker. At first, Bonhoeffer did what many good people do. He watched, he waited, he hoped it would pass. But then he began to notice something strange. Educated people, professors, doctors, ministers, began repeating slogans. They started justifying policies that contradicted everything they once believed. And they didn't seem confused. They seemed convinced. This was what shook him to his core. It wasn't that the ignorant were being manipulated. It was that the intelligent were surrendering. He saw his church remain silent as the Nazis rose. He saw friends turn away from truth in favor of safety. And that was the moment Bonhoeffer awakened. He realized this wasn't just political. This was spiritual. It was a war for the human mind and soul. He once wrote, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." And from that moment on, he refused to stay silent. He became one of the first and most outspoken critics of Hitler from within the church. He helped Jews escape. He spoke truth from the pulpit. And eventually, he joined a secret plot to assassinate Hitler, knowing it could cost him his life. It did. But what Bonhoeffer left behind was more than political resistance. It was a roadmap, a warning, a mirror. Because what he saw in Nazi Germany wasn't unique to that time or place. It was something he feared could happen anywhere, anytime good people stop thinking. In the next part, we'll hear the words he wrote from his prison cell and why they still haunt us to this day. Let's continue.
In 1943, locked away in a Nazi prison cell, awaiting trial and very likely execution, Dietrich Bonhoeffer picked up a pen. What he wrote in those final months wasn't angry, it wasn't bitter. It was clear, precise, almost surgical. One line in particular still sends a chill down the spine. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasoning is no use. Facts that contradict a stupid person's prejudgment simply need not be believed. And when they are irrefutable, they are just pushed aside as inconsequential. Let that sink in. Bonhoeffer wasn't just venting about people being difficult. He was identifying something darker, a condition where logic simply stops working.
where truth bounces off like rain on armor. Have you ever had that kind of conversation, where you come with facts, studies, proof, and still the person across from you just repeats the same phrase over and over again? You might be trying to show them a bridge is out ahead, and they respond with a meme. You might be quoting the CDC, and they tell you about what their cousin saw on Facebook. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and Bonhoeffer was one of the first to say that frustration is not just emotional, it's structural. He believed stupidity, this kind, wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was a collapse of the ability to think critically. And that collapse, once it happens, makes reason powerless. It's like trying to light a candle in a vacuum. There's no oxygen for the flame to catch. The real danger? This kind of stupidity is self-satisfied. It believes it's doing good. It doesn't question itself because it thinks questioning is weakness. And that's what makes it immune to correction, immune to evidence, immune to conversation. Bonhoeffer saw this up close. Professors quoting Nazi propaganda, clergy using scripture to justify cruelty, friends insisting silence was just keeping the peace. So, what do you do when reason no longer works? That's the question we face today, isn't it? Because in a world drowning in misinformation, echo chambers, and outrage, we're no longer debating facts. We're trying to speak across a cognitive chasm. And unless we understand what Bonhoeffer understood, we might keep shouting into the void, thinking louder voices will bring change, when in fact, the minds we're speaking to have already quietly shut the door. But why does stupidity spread so easily, especially among the intelligent? That's what we'll explore next. Let's keep going.
There's a strange comfort in believing that evil is the ultimate enemy. Because at least evil is visible. It wears a face, it carries a weapon, it makes you react. But Bonhoeffer saw something more terrifying. He wrote, "Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion. It leaves behind a sense of unease. Eventually it breaks down. But stupidity? It feels righteous. It believes it's doing good. And that makes it absolutely immune to correction." Think about that for a moment. Evil knows it's wrong. Even the worst dictators, the worst criminals, deep down, know they are violating something. That awareness, as dark as it is, creates pressure, resistance, guilt, and eventually collapse. But stupidity, especially moral stupidity, believes it's being noble. It believes it's helping. And that makes it far more contagious and far more dangerous. Imagine this. A corrupt politician might hide what he's doing. He lies, he evades, because he knows it's wrong. But the people who defend him, who share misinformation, who justify his actions, who attack the truth, they often believe they're protecting democracy, or fighting the elites, or saving their country. They're not evil. They're convinced. And in their conviction, they become unreachable. That's what Bonhoeffer feared most. Because when evil spreads, people resist. But when stupidity spreads, especially in the name of good, people cheer it on. It doesn't burn itself out. It multiplies. You've probably seen this too. A friend shares a dangerous theory, not because they're malicious, but because it feels right. A neighbor endorses something harmful because it aligns with their fear or their pride or their group identity. they're not trying to deceive. They've already been deceived. And here's the hardest truth of all. You can't fight that with facts. You have to understand the soil it's growing in. So, the lesson? Evil might be loud and destructive, but stupidity, cloaked in virtue, seeps into the cracks. It turns good people into unwitting agents of harm. And it spreads fastest when the system is designed to reward simplicity over complexity, emotion over truth. So in the next part, we'll explore how modern society, our media, our politics, even our workplaces, create the perfect environment for this kind of stupidity to thrive. And we'll ask the question Bonhoeffer never stopped asking. Why do people, smart, well-meaning people, stop thinking? Let's look at the structure behind the surrender.
Sometimes people don't stop thinking because they're lazy. They stop because thinking has become too expensive. Not in money, but in energy, in time, in emotional cost. There's a term for this in modern psychology and organizational theory. It's called functional stupidity. Coined by scholars Mats Alvesen and Andre Spicer, it describes a strange but familiar phenomenon. Smart people in smart environments, choosing not to ask difficult questions because doing so would disrupt the system they're in. Let me give you an example. Imagine a corporate meeting. The numbers don't add up. The marketing campaign makes no ethical sense, but no one says anything. Because asking the hard question might upset the manager, might stall the project, might risk your position. So the team moves forward. No one is stupid, but everyone chooses not to think too deeply. Why? Because the cost of awareness feels higher than the cost of compliance. Now, zoom out. Apply that same principle to a society under pressure. People working 2 or 3 jobs, juggling bills, kids, health issues, bombarded by 24/7 news cycles, algorithmic feeds, and social media outrage. In that environment, is it any surprise that we cling to easy answers? When you're drowning in stress, complexity becomes the enemy. You don't have time to read the full article. You skim the headline. You don't compare sources. You share the meme. You don't dig. You default. And slowly, without realizing it, your mind builds habits around that shortcut. Not because you're unintelligent, but because your system is overloaded. This is what Bonhoeffer never got to see, but what he would have understood instantly. That modern stupidity isn't just a moral failure, it's an economic strategy for survival. In a world that punishes depth and rewards speed, that glorifies productivity but neglects contemplation, the thinking mind becomes inefficient. And here's the tragedy. What starts as self-protection becomes self-erasure. So, the lesson? If we want people to think more clearly, we have to make thinking feel safe again, possible again, valued again. And to do that, we need to understand how deeply our systems, from media to politics to technology, encourage these shortcuts. So, in the next part, we'll explore the biggest culprit of all, the algorithm, the machine that feeds us what we want to hear and punishes us when we think for ourselves. Let's continue.
Let's be honest. No one wakes up in the morning thinking, today I'm going to outsource my thinking to an algorithm. And yet, millions of us do it every single day. It starts innocently. You scroll through your feed. You see a post that makes you feel something: anger, outrage, pride,
agreement. You like it, you share it, you move on. But behind the scenes, something else is happening. That click, that pause, that moment your eyes stayed on one sentence longer, it's being recorded, measured, fed into a machine that doesn't care about truth, only engagement. This is the algorithmic trap. Platforms like Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, X, they don't exist to inform you. They exist to hold your attention. And what holds your attention best isn't nuance, isn't deep thinking. It's emotional spikes. It's simple answers to complex problems. It's us versus them. It's confirmation, not challenge. A 2018 study from MIT found that false information spreads 6 times faster on social media than truth. Why? Because falsehoods are often more surprising, more emotionally charged, and easier to digest. And the algorithms, they notice, they amplify, they reward. So the more you react, the more you get fed exactly what keeps you reacting. It becomes a loop, a closed loop of intellectual reinforcement, a digital echo chamber built just for you. And slowly, the algorithm stops just learning from you. It starts shaping you. You think you're choosing your feed? Most days, your feed is choosing you. This is no accident, because emotional engagement is profitable. Outrage is sticky. Division is monetizable. And so big tech, without needing to push lies, directly simply engineers an environment where thinking critically becomes harder and reacting emotionally becomes second nature. Now pause here. This isn't about demonizing technology. It's about recognizing the design and how, unless we are conscious, our minds slowly become optimized for stimulation, not contemplation. So the lesson? If we want to reclaim our ability to think, we have to step outside the loop. That means slowing down, asking why something was shown to us, and choosing not to share unless we truly understand. Because every like, every comment, every share isn't just a reaction, it's a vote. And the algorithm is always listening. But here's where things get even harder. Because even if we unplug, even if we slow down, our very brains are wired to resist uncomfortable truths. And in the next part, we'll explore exactly why and how that vulnerability is being used against us. Let's keep going.
Have you ever read something that challenged what you believed? And instead of feeling curious, you felt angry, defensive, maybe even a little attacked? That's not a flaw. That's your brain doing exactly what it was wired to do. See, long before smartphones and social media, our brains evolved for survival, not for intellectual honesty. In a dangerous world, your brain's priority wasn't to ask, is this idea well-sourced and fact-checked? It was to ask, is this safe? Does this make me feel secure? Does this align with my tribe? And when something didn't, your brain triggered a threat response. This is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we feel when we're holding two conflicting beliefs at the same time. Let's say you believe you're a kind person, but you suddenly realize you've been ignoring something unjust, or you support someone strongly and then learn something deeply unsettling about them. In that moment, you don't automatically shift your belief. More often than not, you reject the new information. Not because it's false, but because it hurts. It threatens your identity, your belonging, your sense of stability. And when people are already exhausted, overwhelmed, or insecure, as so many are today, this discomfort feels unbearable. So we reach for the shortcut. We double down, we scroll past, we mute the voice that made us uncomfortable, and follow the one that soothes us. This isn't stupidity, it's a defense mechanism. But when left unchecked, it becomes a habit. And that habit hardens into a wall no fact can penetrate. Bonhoeffer understood this long before brain scans ever proved it. He knew that people weren't just failing to think, they were afraid to. Afraid of what they might discover, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being alone. So, the lesson? Truth doesn't just require intelligence, it requires courage. The courage to sit with discomfort, to question what feels familiar, and to admit that being wrong doesn't make you less human. It makes you honest. In the next part, we'll see how this vulnerability becomes even more dangerous, not when we're alone, but when we're surrounded by others. Because, as it turns out, stupidity thrives in groups. Let's look at how that happens together. It's one thing to wrestle with uncomfortable truths in your own mind. But what happens when you're not alone? What happens when the group around you has already made up its mind? Dietrich Bonhoeffer observed something chilling during his years under Nazi rule. He noticed that people didn't lose their ability to think when they were alone. They lost it when they were surrounded by others. He wrote, "It becomes clear that stupidity is not a psychological problem, but a sociological one." Let that sink in. Stupidity, in the way Bonhoeffer described it, spreads like a social infection. It's not just an individual choosing not to think, it's an entire group making that choice for them. And the science backs it up. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran a famous experiment. He showed participants a simple question, lines of different lengths, and asked them to choose the matching one. Easy, right? But here's the twist. In each group, only one person was a real subject. The rest were actors, giving deliberately wrong answers. And what happened? 75% of participants gave the wrong answer at least once just to go along with the group. Why? Because the fear of being different, of standing alone, is often stronger than the desire to be right. You've probably felt that too. Maybe you were in a room where everyone laughed at a cruel joke and you stayed silent. Or you saw a harmful belief being spread, but no one else challenged it, so you didn't either. It's not weakness, it's human, but it's also how bad ideas survive. Not because they make sense, but because they've been normalized by the group. This is why movements, mobs, even online trends can turn thoughtful people into echo chambers, where slogans replace questions, where disagreement feels like betrayal, where conformity becomes virtue. And once you're inside that social current, thinking differently feels like drowning. So what's the lesson? If stupidity is sociological, then resisting it often means being willing to stand alone. And that takes more than facts. It takes inner strength, conviction, and a willingness to be the only one in the room asking, but is this right? In the next part,
We'll explore how modern technology, especially social media, has turned that social pressure into a full-blown psychological trap. Because now it's not just people shaping your beliefs, it's algorithms. Let's keep going.
History has a strange way of repeating itself, not always with the same costumes, but with the same script. If you've ever wondered, how could people believe something so obviously false, you're not alone. But that question has been asked before, centuries before, in places far from smartphones and hashtags. Take the Salem witch trials in 1692. A small town in colonial Massachusetts filled with fear, religious fervor, and social tension. And one day, a few girls began to convulse, to scream, to claim they were cursed. Panic spread like wildfire. Neighbors accused neighbors, friends turned on friends. And over the course of just a few months, 20 innocent people were executed. Why? Not because of evil intentions, but because of fear, group pressure, and the seductive pull of certainty in uncertain times. Now, fast forward to the 1950s, the Red Scare. America's fear of communism reaches fever pitch. Suddenly, suspicion is a virtue, and accusing someone, even without evidence, feels like patriotism. Careers were destroyed, families torn apart, ideas silenced, all in the name of protecting democracy. And now? Well, we don't burn witches or blacklist artists, but we do cancel people. We do share lies that feel emotionally satisfying. We do retreat into digital mobs fueled by outrage and tribal loyalty. On Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, we're living through modern-day witch hunts. The targets may change, but the mechanism stays the same. Someone posts something controversial, screenshots fly, context disappears, and within hours, strangers are demanding punishment, not understanding. And here's the scary part. Most of it doesn't come from bad people. It comes from people who genuinely believe they're doing good. Just like the villagers in Salem, just like the Red Scare committees, just like us when we confuse emotion with truth. So, what's the lesson? Mass delusion doesn't require malice, just momentum, and a group willing to trade thinking for belonging. Bonhoeffer understood this. That's why he didn't just warn us about propaganda. He warned us about ourselves. Because when fear and certainty team up, they can make entire societies lose their minds and feel righteous while doing it. In the next part, we'll talk about how Bonhoeffer responded, not with blind hope, but with something much harder and far more powerful: costly grace. Let's go deeper.
In a world that rewards silence, choosing to think can feel like rebellion. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood this better than most. As a theologian, he believed in grace, but not the kind of grace that asks nothing and costs nothing. He called that cheap grace, the kind that excuses cowardice, avoids conflict, and says, well, that's not my business. Instead, he spoke of something much harder, something deeper, something that demands something of you. He called it costly grace. Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship. To Bonhoeffer, real grace, real wisdom came with a cost, and for him, that cost was everything. He spoke out when it was dangerous. He resisted when it was unpopular. And eventually, he gave up his freedom, his safety, and his life because he refused to stop thinking. But you don't have to be a martyr to understand this truth. Costly grace is what you feel when you speak up in a room full of people who all agree on something you know is wrong. It's the sting of isolation when you choose not to laugh at a cruel joke. It's the uncomfortable silence that follows your question when no one else dared to ask it. And it's worth asking, when did we start treating thinking as an act of defiance? When did nuance become threatening? When did humility start sounding like weakness? We live in a time where having a strong opinion earns applause, but asking a careful question earns suspicion. And yet, if we want to remain truly human, truly awake, we must learn to embrace the discomfort. Because thinking clearly in a world clouded by noise requires grace, but not the cheap kind, the kind that costs, the kind that hurts, the kind that asks you to stand even when no one stands with you. So the lesson? Every time you choose depth over reaction, curiosity over certainty, truth over tribe, you're practicing costly grace, and you're doing exactly what Bonhoeffer hoped more people would have the courage to do. But here's the thing, you can't do it alone forever. So in the next part, we'll explore what needs to change, not just inside us, but around us, because the system itself is part of the problem. Let's talk about that next.
Have you ever noticed, the louder someone says something, even if it's wrong, the more attention they seem to get? And the person who speaks slowly, carefully, who adds nuance or admits, "I'm not sure," often gets ignored, or worse, mocked. It's not your imagination. In our world today, stupidity isn't just tolerated, it's rewarded. Not because society loves ignorance, but because our systems are designed to reward certainty, speed, and volume, not wisdom. Think about social media. If you post a hot take, something outrageous, divisive, emotionally charged, you're more likely to get shares, likes, comments. Why? Because it triggers people, and the algorithm feeds on that. But post something thoughtful, something that says, "It's complicated," or "Here's what both sides might have missed." The algorithm shrugs. It's too quiet, too slow, too inconvenient. And so online, and often offline, we begin to learn something dangerous. Reacting pays. Thinking costs. This doesn't just happen online. In politics, simple slogans win over complex solutions. "We're gonna fix everything" gets more votes than "we need structural reform" and long-term sacrifice. In the workplace, the person who speaks confidently, even if they're wrong, is often promoted faster than the one who hesitates to double-check their facts. And in conversations, how often do we reward the person who listens, who asks follow-up questions, who says, "I might be wrong, but..." Rarely, because we've built a culture where noise wins, speed wins, performance wins. And as a result, we penalize the very thing that could save us: deliberate thought. This is what Bonhoeffer feared most, not just the individual who stops thinking, but the society that makes it feel pointless to even try. So what's the lesson here? If thinking feels hard, if it feels lonely, if it feels unrewarded, you're not broken. You're just swimming against a current designed to push you toward intellectual surrender. But here's the good news. If systems reward stupidity, then we can build better systems. And in the next part, we'll explore how technology, and especially artificial intelligence, has taken this problem to an entirely new level. because it's no longer just human psychology being manipulated. It's human cognition being targeted with machine precision. Let's go there next.
Not long ago, propaganda was something you could recognize. A voice on the radio, a poster on the wall, a speech filled with slogans and flags. You could feel it coming. But today, propaganda wears a much smarter face. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And most of the time, it sounds like your own thoughts. That's what makes this moment in history different. We've moved from broadcast manipulation to personalized psychological targeting. And leading the charge is artificial intelligence. Here's how it works. Every time you click, scroll, pause, or react, you're giving tiny signals to the machine. Signals about what you fear, what excites you, what angers you, what makes you feel seen. And the AI learns faster than any human ever could. It doesn't just know what you like, it starts to predict what you'll believe. And then it feeds it to you again and again until it becomes your reality. We used to worry about governments controlling information. Now we face something more subtle and far more invasive. Algorithms that feed you comforting lies, not because they're evil, but because they're profitable. Deepfake videos, AI-generated voices, hyper-targeted ads. None of them are science fiction anymore. We're no longer dealing with biased news anchors. We're dealing with machines that study your blind spots and slip right through them. And here's the scariest part. We don't even notice it happening because it feels personalized, convenient, right. But convenience can be a trap. Bonhoeffer never lived to see artificial intelligence, but he saw the pattern. When people stop thinking for themselves, they become vulnerable to any force that claims to think for them. He called them puppets, whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. Today, that force isn't always a dictator. Sometimes it's an algorithm with no face and no conscience. So what's the lesson? We must treat information the way we treat food. What's fast and easy is often the most toxic. Thinking critically in the age of AI isn't just a skill, it's a survival tactic. In the next part, we'll see how even the smartest people, doctors, engineers, lawyers, fell for lies during a global crisis, not because they lacked intelligence, but because the pressure was simply too much. Let's go deeper. After everything we've explored, the social pressure, the algorithms, the blind spots wired into our biology, you might be wondering, so what now? Is there anything I can actually do? Yes, and it doesn't require a PhD. It doesn't require unplugging from society or deleting every app. It begins with something simple and surprisingly powerful: intellectual humility. It's the quiet recognition that what we know might not be the whole truth. That we all, no matter how smart, how educated, how well-intentioned, have blind spots. And that's not shameful. That's human. Psychologists describe intellectual humility as the ability to say, I could be wrong. Let me check again. Not as a sign of weakness, but as a mark of maturity. And like any skill, it gets stronger with practice. So here are a few gentle habits, daily practices that can help you reclaim your mind. First, ask yourself better questions. When you feel strongly about something, pause and ask, what would it take to change my mind? If your answer is nothing, you're not thinking, you're defending. Second, seek out disagreement, not to argue, but to learn.
Spend 10 minutes a week reading or listening to someone you normally disagree with, not to change your values, but to test how solid they really are. Third, slow down your sharing. Before reposting that shocking headline or viral clip, ask yourself, have I verified this or am I just reacting? Because that moment, just a few seconds of stillness, can break the chain of misinformation. And finally, get comfortable saying, I don't know. In a culture that celebrates hot takes and snap judgments, admitting uncertainty is an act of courage. And here's a secret most people never hear. The more you practice intellectual humility, the more confident, not less, you'll become. Not because you always have the answer, but because you know how to ask better questions. So the lesson? Reclaiming your mind isn't about becoming the smartest person in the room. It's about becoming the clearest thinker in your own life. And when enough people do that, quietly, daily, consistently, something shifts. Not just in you, but in the culture around you. In the next part, we'll talk about what that culture could look like, a world where thinking is valued again and stupidity is no longer rewarded. Because real change is never just personal, it's structural. Let's imagine what that might look like.
Up to this point, we've talked a lot about the individual mind, how it breaks down, how it can be reclaimed, and how we're all vulnerable in different ways. But here's the truth. We can't fix this problem with personal effort alone, because stupidity, at least the kind Bonhoeffer warned us about, doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in systems. In schools that reward memorization over reflection, in workplaces where silence is safer than honesty, in political landscapes that favor sound bites over substance, and on platforms where the most outraged voice wins the algorithm's affection. So, if we want to shift culture, we have to do more than change minds. We have to change the environments that shape those minds. Let's start with education. What if students were taught from an early age not just what to think, but how to think? To spot fallacies, to pause before reacting, to listen with the intent to understand, not just reply. Countries like Finland already do this. Their schools teach media literacy alongside math. Critical thinking isn't a side project, it's the foundation. Now look at technology. What if social media platforms were required to disclose how their algorithms curate content? What if they rewarded accuracy and context, not just engagement? Imagine clicking share and being prompted, would you like to read a contrasting perspective before you post? That's not censorship. That's design for dignity. And then there's economics. Because when people are drowning in survival stress, working multiple jobs, buried in debt, navigating healthcare systems that confuse more than they heal, they don't have bandwidth left for discernment. So yes, this is about thinking, but it's also about fairness and mental space. Because when the system is rigged to exhaust us, to divide us, to distract us, stupidity isn't a failure, it's a consequence. Bonhoeffer didn't live to see social media. He never read a headline designed to enrage or watched a deepfake go viral. But he understood this, that unless we build structures that support clarity, truth, and courage, then even the brightest minds can dim under pressure. So what's the lesson? Personal responsibility matters. But without structural change, we're just asking people to swim against the current forever. The real revolution, it's not just inside us. It's in what we build around us. And in the final part, we'll return to the heart of this message. Why thinking clearly, even when no one else is, might be the most radical thing you can do. Let's finish this together.
There will come a moment, not in some grand debate or global crisis, but in the quiet of your own life,
when you'll feel it. That subtle tension between what feels comfortable and what feels true. It might happen in a conversation with a friend when everyone nods in agreement, but something deep inside you whispers, "This isn't right." It might happen online when you see a post that confirms what you believe, but something tells you this is too simple. Or maybe it's in a choice you make, to speak up, to ask a question, to not go along. And in that moment, you'll feel the cost. Bonhoeffer called it the moment of standing fast. Who stands fast, he asked. Who will remain true when all around them have surrendered? Not the brilliant, not the well-liked, but those willing to keep thinking, even when it hurts. Because thinking hurts sometimes. It hurts to question beliefs that brought you comfort. It hurts to admit you were wrong. It hurts to risk being misunderstood, left out, or dismissed, simply because you refuse to go along with the crowd. But that pain, that discomfort, is not a sign of failure. It's the cost of clarity, the cost of freedom, and it's a cost worth paying. So, here's your final challenge. This week, take one belief you hold tightly and explore the best arguments against it. Not to tear yourself down, not to change your mind, but to strengthen the part of you that refuses to go numb. Because that part, the part that's still curious, still humble, still awake, that's the part they can't control. That's the part Bonhoeffer died protecting, and the part this world desperately needs more of. So, when the pressure comes, when the noise gets louder, when everyone else seems so sure, so fast, so loud, stand fast, even if you're the only one standing. And if this message stirred something in you, something quiet but steady, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who thinks or someone who wants to. Because thinking clearly, loving truth, and staying human isn't something we do alone. It's something we do together.
If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a video. You are choosing something rare, something quiet, something powerful. You're choosing to think in a world that begs you to react. You're choosing to reflect when it would be easier to scroll. You're choosing to stay awake when the system profits from your sleep. And maybe that's the greatest resistance of all. We've walked through the shadows together, from Nazi Germany to your social media feed, from cognitive blind spots to the weight of costly grace. We've seen how stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence, but the abandonment of responsibility. And yet, through it all, there is hope, because if stupidity can be learned, then clarity can be practiced. If conformity can be rewarded, then courage can be cultivated. And if history has repeated its mistakes, then maybe this time we don't have to. So here's what I ask of you now. If this message resonated, don't let it die here. Share this video with someone who's not afraid to think deeply. Comment below, what's one belief you're willing to examine this week? And subscribe if you want to keep reclaiming your mind, one thought, one truth, one act of clarity at a time. And if you ever feel alone in that journey, remember this: you're not. There's a quiet revolution happening, a community of people who still care about truth, who still believe in the sacred act of thinking, and who refuse to go numb just because the world tells them to. So take a breath, stand fast, and keep walking. We're right here with you. Until next time, stay awake, stay human, and stay free.